Greetings, everybody. I see lots of you joining, so we'll wait a moment as everyone gets connected to audio. So again, welcome, and we'll just take a moment or so as we all get connected. And I still see lots of people connecting, so I'm going to give it a little more time for everyone to continue to connect. And okay, greetings, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us today. My name is Stacy Aquero. I'm the Associate Director of Admissions at Stony Brook. Behind the scenes, we also have Amanda Mills with us, who will be helping me with today's session, as well as helping me monitor some questions through the Q&A as they come in. But today I am going to be talking to you really about some tips on writing a successful essay. And the biggest thing that needs to kind of help understand what needs to be done with writing an essay is understanding that there are multiple types of essays when it comes to your college application. And one of the things that many of us in the admissions world kind of joke about is that when we're talking about your college application, not just to Stony Brook, but in multiple schools, knowing what type of essay per university that you're applying to really will be depending on the school that you're applying to. And so that phrase works not just for essays, but for when applications are due, what things are required for that application. So every school is going to be different. I am going to talk a lot in generals about types of essays, not just particular to Stony Brook. And then at the end, I'll give a little bit of basic Stony Brook information and perhaps weave some of that through just to give you a little bit of framework. But let's talk a little bit about what types of essays there may be for your college application. Probably the most popular or common is the personal statement. And that is typically the majority of what is known as the common application prompts. And we are going to go through those later in the presentation. But your personal statement is really something that is about you. You are telling a story about yourself and weaving in additional information. And we'll go into more details about what that personal statement is later. Another big type of essay that's popular is, why do you want to go to quote unquote this school? What makes you want to go to that specific school? For this question and the next question, academic interest, another type of essay talking about why you want to study that major, those really need to be specific to the school. Right? So I want to study physics. You need to not just say, I want to study physics because I took a physics class in high school and liked it. That may very well be true, and that might be the start of your essay, but you're going to want to be a little more specific and probably do some research about what it is that you foresee your career goal to be, what kind of classes you're interested in taking. And that's really very true for the former question as well. Why do you want to go to that specific college? So if a university is asking you that question, that one really does need to be specific. What are the things that you like about that university? What is it that if you are applying to that school and attending that school that you are going to enjoy doing? Is it that you like a specific club? Is it that you like research that a faculty member is doing? You really have to have specific examples of and show the school that you've done your research about that school and why it's a good fit for you. Another essay that many institutions require is a community impact essay. And when I say community impact, it's about what kind of volunteer or activities that you may have done that have impacted your community. And how have you impacted your community? How have you made a difference? And how maybe that you want to continue to make a difference. A little different than the one below, where it's an activity interest essay, where you're really just talking about one or more of your particular interests and activities. And this one you have to be careful, where it says activity interest essay, it might ask for something very specific. It is probably not asking for a list of your activities. And I'm going to say this again later on, but these essays in general are not a listing of things that you've done or a listing of things that are already in your application. Other types of essays are a little more social justice. So similar to the community impact, but what are you more passionate about? What topics are you passionate about, and how do you engage in that? It doesn't necessarily have to have an impact in the community and show that you're volunteering, but it's showing what kind of causes are important to you and perhaps what you may do at the school or on your own time to engage in that social justice cause. And then program specific. So whether it's major or career path, it might be a little broader. But again, those are program specific, where you would have to do a little research and tie to what your interests are, what the school is going to be able to provide in that program specific, and what you can get out of it at that institution that you're applying to. So I just kind of went in broad general about different types of essay, and we're going to go a little bit further into some of them. But the question that we often get once we start talking about the types of essays is, how many essays do I have to write? And I'm going to toggle a little bit back and forth between the last slide and this slide just to help you visualize a little bit of it as well. We talked about the personal statement, and the personal statement really just being about yourself. And that is a very common essay, but there are many schools that will require either a second essay or a supplemental essay. Sometimes they're required, sometimes they're optional. Or a primary essay. And when I say a primary essay, they might ask for both a personal statement and then a statement on why do you want to go to that school or why you want to study a particular major. Whereas your supplemental essays might be more of that community impact or social justice. And so again, that phrase that I'm going to use a few times throughout this presentation is, it really will depend upon the schools that you're applying to, is how many essays you will have to write in terms of, am I required to do a personal statement as well as a primary essay, as well as a supplemental essay. Stony Brook requires one essay, which is pretty much a personal statement, which also we'll go through in a moment in the common application, allows you sort of beyond some of the prompts, an essay of your choice. So it really kind of weaves in the choice of a personal statement or some of the more primary supplemental essay options that are social justice based or community based or activity based. But many schools also will have additional essays for additional programs. So honors program essays, scholarship essays are prime examples and probably the most common. At Stony Brook, we have multiple honors programs, each with additional essays depending on which ones you're applying to. Certain universities for certain scholarships will have scholarship essays. And then of course, you should be prepared as you are potentially applying for outside scholarships outside of the schools that you're applying to, will also have essays that could be on a very specific topic that's different than some of these choices that I gave before. But a lot of times they are on community impact, activity, social justice, your major, why you even want to go to a particular school. So really, again, doing your research. And a slide that I don't have on here in between here, because I kind of do it in another presentation, but I'll just talk about it, is as you are formulating where you're applying to, what additional programs for that institution you may be applying to, like honors, or if they have separate scholarship essays, is the organization that you need to keep of where am I applying, what is required, how many essays as well as additional documents are needed, how do I apply to them, is it with the application, is it after, is it in a form, and when are all of the deadlines? Are they all at the same time? Are they different? When you're applying to, say, 8 or 10 schools, and they all have different deadlines, different requirements, it can be a lot to remember, of course, in your senior year, as you're still having a lot of coursework as well as a lot of fun activities for your senior year. And so you really want to figure out your organizational system, whether it's a spreadsheet, whether it's a good old-fashioned notebook, a planner, whatever your organizational system is I highly, highly recommend making sure you have that kind of organization. So, of course, as I mentioned earlier, the personal statement is really probably the most common and most popular of the essays that you will have to write. Any school that's a common application school will really have the common application prompts, which are mostly different versions of personal statement essays, which we'll go through later. But this is really a essay about yourself versus a very specific question. And you need to be able to share a personal story or stories without repeating what's in your application. This is a chance where you really need to show yourself of who you are, show the admissions office that you're of the schools that you're applying to, some insight as to who you are and why you may be a good fit for that university. And in that little second bullet, I say share personal stories without repeating what's in your application. You're going to see in a few slides, I'm going to kind of start going through some tips. You really don't want to have multiple stories, so I probably should have that in the singular. You can weave other stories in and out, but it's not a summary of all of your life stories in that personal statement. It's really talking about one component, perhaps that can really give a reflection, and oftentimes it will weave other examples in. You just want to make sure that you're giving a story and not just listing a variety of things without giving any details behind it. So I'm going to repeat myself a little bit of what I've just said a little bit and just start with some basic tips as to how you really construct an essay. The first thing that's really important is to start picking a topic and speaking about elements not covered in your application. And again, you want to talk to the university about who you are beyond your grades, beyond what's in your application. But if you see, I have the let your voice be heard and leave an impact kind of bolded and highlighted. The let your voice be heard is a hard one to sometimes describe and to really understand the concept of as any writer, right? Not just a high school student writer, but anyone writing is, how do I know if my voice is being heard versus somebody else being heard? You're going to hear from me to remind you to definitely have multiple people proofread your essay. And oftentimes, I'm sure there's a lot of parents on this call. I'm a parent too, so I get where you're coming from. But it's really, really common as a parent who's proofreading to offer suggestions beyond some of the basic corrections or add more detail here, maybe think about there's too much detail in this area, add some commas, you need to reorganize this. It's really easy to influence changes to an essay and make suggestions that then become not the student's voice. And I have the perfect example of this. As a parent of a now college student, I've over the past few years, obviously have a lot of personal friends who have college age or high school age students who are going through the college application process. And a friend of mine's son was applying to a school with a supplemental essay, and the question was about talking about how they related to a fictional character. Could be in a book, a movie, a TV show, etc. And the student wrote an essay on how they connected to a Marvel character. Now, I am not a Marvel fan. I don't know if I've ever watched a Marvel movie. I apologize to anyone who has, and all of my students out there who are huge fans. I'm sure they're great. I just had never watched one. So he talked about how he connected to this character and why. The mom asked me to read it because she felt that it was not a great essay. And so I quickly read through the essay, and it was a good essay. And so I asked her why she thought it wasn't a good essay. And she thought that the student should not write about this character because the character actually, and again, I don't know the movie, I don't remember the character's name even, but he was a villain in the movie. He was not of hero or somebody in the positive. And so she thought immediately that anyone reading the essay would see her student, her child, the applicant, as a villain versus in a good light. Now, the essay had to do with why he related to this character, and this character was somebody who built a lot of machines and a variety of different mechanical components and very creative in the building. And the student was applying to be a mechanical engineer. And that was kind of all he explained about it. It wasn't anything about personality. It wasn't anything about connection. It wasn't anything. It was all about how his interest to be a mechanical engineer started when he was a kid and how he played Legos and a variety of different progressions of classes and how he related to that because this person had similar experiences in the movie that related to building. And I thought it was a great essay. And I said, so before I kind of said to the mom that it was a great essay and I didn't think he should change it, I asked her who she would envision him writing about if he were to change the character. And she said Jack from Titanic. And before I even asked her why or how would he think he's like Jack from Titanic, I asked her son, did you ever watch the movie Titanic and do you know who I'm talking about? And he said, well, I know the movie, but I never watched it and I would have no idea how I relate to him. So I kind of looked at both of them and I said, there's your answer. That is a student's voice not being heard. I know that was a long-winded story for that, but I think it's important to know that we are trying to see who you are as a person and how you are going to fit. And so you're going to see in a couple of my tips that it doesn't always have to be this most elaborate story or something in your head that you think it needs to be. It needs to be who you are as a person. That is all. And really needs to feel that we're connecting with you. So how do you get started from that? Because I get it. It seems like a lot of information in your head, and now I need to, I'll date myself and say pen to paper, but I guess it's, fingers to keyboard. and how do you get started? Um, and when you're talking about the common application prompts, you really need to choose a topic that's going to highlight who you are. And we're going to go through that in a few moments, because you may look at a few of these prompts and say, well, I have nothing of that sort. Well, don't choose that one. The other thing you need to know is, if you haven't started already, um, be prepared to write a few essays and several drafts. It is not like you're just going to hang up from this call or sign out and kind of bang out an essay and be like, okay, I'm done. It's going to go through several drafts. It might even change. Um, Around this time last year, again, I have a daughter. She kind of, because of where I work, I made her last summer work all on her essay. And then probably around this time last year, she changed her topic completely. So those things are normal and okay. So you're going to want to be prepared to write a few essays. And I kind of started talking about this in the previous slide. It's okay if it's what I call a mundane experience. You might think that it sounds insignificant, but if it's had an impact on you and on your life, then that is the most significant thing to talk about, because it's your moment and it's going to describe who you are. Not everyone is having, at 17 and 18, these most life-altering parts of their life that they can talk about. And frankly, I hope you haven't. You're young, and you've had experiences, and those experiences are impactful, but it doesn't have to be this shattering experience that has completely altered your life. So don't worry that it has to be more significant than what you think it is. Um, and as you get started, I want you to be mindful of, when I have a typo, my apologies. That should be of format and font. You're going to have to cut and paste your application. So when I say be mindful of it, is like, don't get super crazy on, I need to have this perfectly indented and I need to have this exactly the way it's going to be, is because you're going to have to um, finalize it and cut and paste it into any application system that you're applying to. So kind of worry about that as you're going through some of the drafts. So let's talk about some best tips. Some of them are going to be a little more self-explanatory, and some of them I'm going to go through a little more. Answer the question. Believe it or not, there are plenty of people who submit an essay and don't really answer the question. So similar to any writing assignment you have in history or English class, you need to make sure you're answering the question. So keep that question next to you when you're typing in on the top of the essay, and really go through that. Use the word limit and do not go over it too much. So as I mentioned, you're going to have to copy and paste this into a application system. Depending on the application system, if the essay is 500 words or less, they might cut you off at 500 words. And if you're cutting and pasting it and not paying attention, and you had 600 words, your last 100 words may be cut off. Now, not every application system may just have a suggestion and will let you go over, but you really want to know. I know there are scholarship essays that have that on a Google form, and it will say, you know, when you're filling out that application, you know, 20 characters left or whatever it is. So you really, really want to be mindful of that per different application system that you're applying to. So I put this in again because it is a best tip. I obviously gave a detailed story on use your own voice and your own words, but I put that again in here because I like to talk about it with the next 2 points, where I say don't overuse thesaurus, and at the same time, don't overuse words such as like or very or many. It's really common in an essay to to help expand and see that. But when you overuse thesaurus, you are not becoming, you're becoming less and less of that personal storytelling. So you really want to make sure that you are telling the story as you would be able to explain it. I also like to remind people in this area that keep in mind, depending on the schools you're applying to, if there is an interview component, you will be asked questions on your essay, or you will have conversations with the admissions counselor who's interviewing you on this essay. So it's something that you need to be able to talk through and sound like your essay. So again, using your own voice, using vocabulary that is comfortable in your natural conversation and in your natural writing. You don't want to list your activities in your essay. You really want to have a logical flow and be able to talk about a new story. I saw a question before in here, but you definitely want to have someone proofread it, and you proofread it and have someone else proofread it. I think there was a question about how many people should proofread it. We probably say more, at least one person, possibly two, but that's up to you. I have another tip about proofreading. This is one that I learned when I was in school, late in the game. I wish I would have known this my first year. So I share this for 30 plus years now, because it really helped me in my writing. So anyone who has struggles with sentence structure, with any kind of grammar or spelling, I am a person who, when I read through and proofread, as you saw with my mistake in my previous slide, I kind of read it as I know it in my head, right? Because I've just written a paper or written a presentation and know exactly what I'm saying. So I look through it and it sounds right. But I have a great tip where you read a essay backwards. And what I mean by backwards is you read it from last sentence to first sentence. Now, this is not going to help with that proofreading of your logical flow of your message. So of course you need to make sure that organizationally it has a logical flow. But if you are reading that essay from last sentence to first, you're reading each sentence individually without the next flow, and without kind of skipping ahead, and you will really catch any grammar mistakes. You will have a much higher rate of catching spelling mistakes, especially with, it's so common with spell check now that it got switched to a different word that doesn't come up in grammar or spell check. So it really does help. It's very time consuming, but something that will come in handy, not just for this, but really through your entire college process. Another tip is submit by the deadline. I did see a question in there about deadlines, as to when an application is due. Do you have to have the essay in? And that is depending on the schools that you apply to. At Stony Brook, yes. Our early action deadline is November 1st, and our regular application deadline is January 15th, and that means the whole application. So the essay, the letters of reference, the transcripts, and if you're submitting test scores. So more tips. I kind of talked about some of these. Don't expect to have one draft or one essay. Make sure when you're reading it, you need to kind of look at what parts need to be elaborated on, or made more clear. Does every sentence need to be in this essay? And I say that because you do have a word limit. And you want to make sure that you're looking through this. And I actually say this with with something that I think is another great component of the essay is a lot of people will talk a little bit about the past, something that helped spark them, a memory. Sometimes it's a tragedy, sometimes it's an injury. Whatever it is that has influenced you to the person you are today, you really want to stay in the present. So I always say about a third of your essay can be in the past, which is leading up to that moment. But we, as university admissions officers, want to know who you are today and how it may have impacted you. So sometimes it's easy to write a good page about that whole experience and about the past, and then you're not writing as much about the impact. So really see, does every sentence need to be in that essay? And what part is not supporting my main argument? So again, a common essay is about, something that's influenced you or something that's impacted you. And you're talking a lot about the moment versus the impact or the influence. You probably want to reverse that a little bit. And then some more of my same tips, so I won't go through them again. A couple of things what not to do. Don't rely on spell check. Don't go over the word count. Do not talk about everything. Again, it is not a listing of everything you've done. Keep in mind, if you haven't started playing around yet in the application systems like the Common Application, there's a spot for you to list all of those activities. So you don't need to relist them in your essay, especially not a personal statement. You don't want to be disrespectful. And when I say that, I mean of what may be an opposing opinion. It is okay to talk about something that's controversial, perhaps, but you want to make sure that the person who's reading it, if they have an opposing opinion, that it is respectful of that opposing position. This next one, I always get questions on because it's also one of those hard ones to kind of wrap your head around sometimes, where I say, don't be too braggy. So there's a balance between boasting your accomplishments and showing what you've learned from those accomplishments versus just talking and listing accomplishments. So you want to kind of balance the learning aspect of everything, as well as don't sort of be too self-interested in something. And what I mean by that is when you are perhaps listing accomplishments or talking about an accomplishment, you don't want to state that because you have done these accomplishments, I now can do all of these things for you. It's like, I did all of these things and learned all of this much, and now I can't wait to come to Stony Brook and learn all of these more things to enhance what I've already learned or to continue my learning. So you always want to balance it with, I think some of the best advices are when you're talking about any kind of topic is what you've learned from something and how you are going to continue to use that knowledge or expand on that knowledge. So I know this is kind of small on the screen, but first we're going to talk for a moment quickly about some supplemental essays from schools. I'm not going to go through every one of them just to be mindful of time. But you can see what some of them are. I'm going to go to the second bullet because I think it's really telling. And I don't use names of schools in here. These are not from Stony Brook. But the academic community of XYZ school is shaped by unique talents and characters and personalities of each student. Please finish each sentence in 75 characters or less, so we can learn more about you. I'm fascinated by, one thing I would change is blank. Now, 75 characters is not 75 words. Characters include spacing, include punctuation. That is not a lot of characters. And so when I say be in your word limit, and you obviously can't just say, like the last one, in 5 years, I, plan to get a job. Like you kind of have to be a little more descriptive in 75 characters. So really, really specific there. Program-specific supplemental essays. Choose a current event or issue in your community and discuss the business implications. Propose a solution that incorporates business principles or practice. The review panel will look for creativity, drawing connections, and originality. And this has to be in 500 words. This is specific to a school of business at Michigan, so very specific to that program. But let's take a moment and look a little bit through that comment application essay prompts. Again, I'm not going to read through each of them because you can see them in the essay, but these are really your personal statements. So some students have a background, identity, interest, or talent that is so meaningful that they believe their application would be incomplete without it. If this sounds like you, share your story. So again, here you're sharing your story about something of your background or identity that needs further explanation. But again, always bringing that to the present and potentially the future impact by going to college will have on you. So again, I talked a lot about the next one, obstacles we've encountered. Don't stay in the past too much. Explain it. Typically, again, 1/3 of your essay, and then talk about the effect it's had on you now and what those learning experiences are now. So a lot of times, you know, people may use a death in the family and what you've had to overcome. But what are the things you've learned from it? What are the things you still do today? My grandmother passed. She was a huge influence on me because she helped me understand balancing a family life as well as working hard and wanting me to go on to college and do better. And now I do all of these things because of it. So a lot of the essays are surrounded by some of that, whether it's a belief or an idea or an accomplishment that might have sparked some more growth. Again, I don't have to go through all of these, but as you can also see, the last prompt on the common application is to share an essay on any prompt. And you can kind of go through those and help talk about that. So I have a few minutes before we end, and I know there's a couple of questions I may need to get to. I just want to quick talkly about Stony Brook University. I weaved a few things in there, but for any of you who do not know, we are a large, comprehensive research university in Stony Brook, New York. We're the #1 public in the State University of New York system in Long Island, about an hour outside of New York City, ranked number 58 in US News and World Report. We have a lot going on at Stony Brook. We've recently been selected to lead the Center for Climate Solutions on Governor's Island, which is right off of Manhattan. We have been highlighted for our excellence and value to access to education. At Stony Brook, we received last year over 55,000 applications, enrolling probably closer to 3,700 students this year, about 18,000 undergraduate students. We still have a 19-to-1 faculty to student ratio. Quickly, our class profile is about a 92 to a 97 GPA on a 100-point scale, or a 3.6 out of a 4.0. We are test optional. So really important, if you are not going to submit those SAT scores, do not select it on the common application, or we will wait to review your application if you do select it. Also, our application deadlines again are early action for fall, November 1st, January 15th for regular decision, and all of your materials do need to be in by those deadlines, or else it is considered on a space available basis. I can talk a lot more about Stony Brook, but I do want to get to a few of those questions that haven't been answered by my colleague yet. Question about, do you think it's important that details about the specific university or their program is brought in a why this major essay? And if so, how do you suggest someone can be more specific to a university? why this major. I think it depends on the university, but if they are specifically asking for that, they kind of want to know what you want out of the major, and not just the ultimate end career goal, right? Like, I want to be a biology major because I want to be a doctor is a great, reason, although you don't have to be a biology major to be pre-med and go to medical school. But what are the things you want out of that major? Are there specific, have you researched faculty at the school? Have you researched specific elective classes that might sound really engaging and interesting to you? Are there clubs at that university that are related to the academic major? All of those components are what is the academic reason you're picking that major and choosing that school? So those are definitely things that you can put into that component of that essay. And then another question about where in writing to a particular college or university do you utilize your talents and activities instead of personality? So it really depends on the question, but there is definitely a question on your personal background and interest where you are definitely talking about your activity and talent. Oftentimes I say one. You don't want it to be a listing, and sometimes that's confusing because there's so many, right? And a great example is an essay I helped a student with last year. When he first gave me his essay to give some suggestions on, it was a lot of listing of his activities, and he was in marching band, and he was in um, track and field and cross country, and he kind of just listed those. And so then when we talked, I said, like, what do you want to say about these? And really what it came down to is he was a little bit of a shy kid and never thought he would be involved in any of these activities, and nonetheless be a leader by his senior year in some of these activities. So he talked about mostly his experience in marching band and how it allowed him to open up more and become a leader. And then it allowed him to be able to join some other clubs and get more involved. So there's definitely opportunities to do that. And then how would you answer some of those super short 75 character prompts? Would really love examples. So those are hard to be details, and it's really hard for me to give an example because, again, don't forget, it has to be who you are and your personality. So what I would recommend is, if you have to do any of those, is to write out your answer fully, right? Write what you want to say and then start condensing it and figuring out how you are going to condense it, because you need to figure out what you're saying. And obviously, I've been talking to you for 45 minutes. I'm a talker. I say a lot. I write a lot. But if you write out exactly what you want to say and then use those tips back of, do I really need this sentence, or do I really need this phrase? Do I really need these words? What am I trying to say, and how can I say it in the least amount of characters? So I think we have time for probably one or two more questions. At the same time, I know we have many of your contact informations, but I don't know why it didn't go to. So we'll just, I think that's was the end of our presentation anyway, but let me go to quick question. When writing supplemental essays about background or other topics for a university, but the word count is smaller, how do you suggest the essay should be structured? So it's really about keeping it simple. Yes, there's details, but like, what details can be eliminated? Always stick with what's the background, what's the topic, and what have I gained from it? What is the experience I want to gain from it? What have I learned from it? We always want to see things in the positive light, right? So if you're talking about an experience or a background that might be a negative experience, how did it help shape who you are and how will it continue to shape who you are? Does early application have a better chance of being accepted into a school? That really varies from school to school. Last year, Stony Brook was the first time we have had early action in probably 15, 20 years. So we're still doing some analysis in terms of what our admit rate and yield rate were to both early action and our regular decision. Some schools, absolutely. So you will really have to see what that is at each school. And then question about if my SAT is not good, but around average, should I still submit it? Every school will kind of have their what's known as their middle 50%. And so you would want to consider that when applying. At Stony Brook, would say our average is like 1270 to 1450. Can be higher on the higher side depending on majors. So I typically tell people if they don't have within the middle 50, you should not consider it. And then question on, does it have to be a full phrase? How creative can I be? It depends on the question. So in those, if you're talking about those 75 characters or less, they typically are phrases, especially to keep in that. An essay, unless they're telling you to be creative, which there are examples where they say sort of anything goes. If they say anything goes, you absolutely have free reign to be creative. Write a poem, write, anything. But a personal essay should probably be more structured, but it is talking about who you are. So you want to be yourself. So if you want to put a joke in there, if you want to, put lyrics to a song, absolutely. So I think we got to everyone's questions. I want to thank you so much for spending some time with me. A version of this is already on our YouTube page, but I think this one will probably also go up on there at some point. And good luck with your experience. Come to Stony Brook and go see wolves.